Ah, great, it's password protected. Well, yeah, obviously, why wouldn't it be password protected? You really think he's just gonna store all of his important documents on something unguarded? Well, I just really wanted to know what was on this thing. It looked kind of important, and he was hiding it in a safe. Well, good luck, Eric. My dad is a master at passwords. Even I don't know any of his passwords. They're always like 20 characters long, and they use a lot of symbols. So, yeah, you'll never get into it. And when I get back, I am taking that thing back to my dad right away. So, good luck. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Nightmares of Nature. As always, I'm your host, Mr.G. Today, we're talking about the menaces of the rivers. Yep, we're talking about Crocodilians. Now, despite appearances, Crocodilians are not related to lizards. In fact, their closest relatives aren't even any of the traditional reptiles. Rather, their closest relatives are birds, being members of archosaurs, which also means they're related to dinosaurs, although unlike birds, crocodiles aren't dinosaurs themselves, kind of like pterosaurs. Within crocodilians, there are four main groups: crocodiles, alligators, caiman, and gharials. Let's start out by discussing the largest group, the crocodiles. And when I say largest, I mean they both have the most species, and they are also the largest reptiles, with the biggest being the saltwater crocodile, whose males can reach lengths of up to 20 feet long, and females being a lot smaller. However, unlike most animals, reptiles never actually stop growing, meaning that these guys are capable of being much bigger lengths than that. Anyway, crocodiles also have the most range of any crocodilian, living on every continent except for Europe and Antarctica, of course. Man, Europe just does not have any wildlife, does it? Now, crocodiles have your usual diet of fish and other aquatic life, but they're also famous because several species are big game hunters. For example, the Nile Crocodile is famous for attacking migrating wildebeest that travel across rivers, and the Saltwater Crocodile, which in addition to hunting things like water buffalo, is also part marine animal, and thus can go into the ocean to hunt things like small sharks, stingrays, and sea turtles. Next up, we got alligators. Unlike crocodiles, which have a lot of species, there are only two species of alligator: the American alligator and the Chinese alligator. 3 guesses as to where both of them live. These guys are often mistaken for crocodiles, but there are some differences. For example, alligators have a head shaped like a U, while crocodiles have more of a V-shaped head. Now, compared to crocodiles, alligators are relatively lamer, since there's not really any big game that they could hunt. As such, they have a much more basic diet than crocodiles. But something interesting that they've been observed doing is that sometimes they've been observed picking up sticks and waving them around in order to attract birds so they can eat them. That's kind of creepy, not gonna lie. Next we got Cayman, who unlike the other crocodilians here are not actually their own family, rather they're part of the same family as alligators. Cayman live all throughout Central and South America, and they live in calm rivers and lakes. A common misconception about caiman is that they're a lot smaller than other crocodilians, and while that's true in some species, there are some that are pretty average-sized, and the biggest one, the black caiman, is actually bigger than the American alligator. So yeah, not tiny. Finally, we have the Gariel, which lives in India. Now, the Gariel is unique amongst other crocodilians because, as you can see, its snout is a lot more thin. Unlike other crocodilians, this one primarily preys exclusively on fish and pretty much never hunts any sort of big game animals. It just simply lacks the ability to do so due to its rather fragile snout. Well, now that we got the introductions out of the way, let's get into what makes these guys, well, them. So, all crocodilians are semi-aquatic animals. They spend most of their day in the water and usually only come to land in order to absorb heat, being cold-blooded animals. These guys do not chew their food. Rather, for bigger prey, they will instead tear chunks off of their prey and then swallow it whole. Speaking of which, several crocodilians are capable of a move known as the death roll, which is when they grab their prey and then spin them around, thrashing them to death, at which point they will continue to eat them. In most areas, crocodilians are the dominant predators that have little to fear thanks to their thick skin acting as armor. As such, most other predators can barely touch them, with reports of them managing to survive attacks by lion prides with little injury. However, they are not invincible. Young specimens are very vulnerable to predators. Cayman are at risk of jaguar and anaconda attacks. American alligators are hunted by the invasive snake, the Burmese python. And while not a predator, Nile crocodiles are often killed by hippos, which are capable of biting the reptile in half. Yeah. Now, despite their ferocity, crocodilians are actually pretty good parents, with mothers burying their eggs in a hole and guarding it until the babies hatch, at which point the mom scoops the babies up in her mouth and brings them to the water. You know, I kind of find it funny how the harmless sea turtle has to go through a borderline war zone to get to the water, while the vicious crocodile just gets a free ride to it. I just kind of find that funny. Crocodilians have been around since the Mesozoic, with them taking all kinds of shapes, but if you want to learn more about that, then check out my video on weird Mesozoic crocs. However, the groups that we know today didn't exist until after the mass extinction. To end this section off, let's talk about some common myths. First off, a lot of people think that crocodilians don't shed, which they do. They just flake off small parts at a time, unlike snakes and lizards, which shed their entire skin at once. Secondly, some media claim you can hold a crocodile's mouth shut and it'll become harmless. Never do this in real life. They'll just throw you off or slash at you. Thirdly, a lot of people think crocodilians are green, but in reality most of them are bluish-black, a tan color, or a very faded green. Finally, a lot of media depicts Nile crocodiles as having a symbiotic relationship with the bird called the Egyptian plover, with the bird eating chunks stuck in the crocodile's teeth. However, there is literally no reliable source proving that this is a common occurrence. It has never been photographed or filmed, and there is no reliable eyewitnesses ever proving it. The only eyewitness so far is literally from the BC era. Yes, really. And as for the reports that do say this, it hasn't been observed enough in order to prove that this is a common occurrence. Considering how common both of these animals are, you'd think that this would be an easier myth to prove real. But despite no evidence for it, people still repeat it like it's a common thing. Not to mention, crocodiles don't even chew their food, they just tear chunks off, and their teeth are pretty spaced far apart, so it's very unlikely food can get stuck in there in the first place. And also, here's a question for people who believe this. Why is it only Nile crocodiles who need help getting food out of their teeth? Where did they get the evolutionary short stick that caused every other crocodilian to be fine with food stuck in their teeth, but the Nile crocodile needs help getting it out? Okay, let's look at the cards for the crocodilians in this series. First up, we got the Saltwater Crocodile. The only error I can find here is that it claims the reason they store their food is so that it will tenderize. However, in actuality, the reason they store their food is pretty similar to most animals. They're just saving it for later. So yeah, Saltwater gets a 9 out of 10. Next up, the American Alligator. And with this card, this one has a claim that I'm not sure how to confirm or deny it. It claims that attacks on humans become more and more common. And I guess, yeah, that could be true since populations of both alligators and humans are increasing, so I guess run-ins would be more common. But at the same time, this doesn't really sound right, but I don't want to deduct a point for this because that sounds like nitpicking. And besides, the rest of this card is pretty good, so I'm giving this a very cautious 10 out of 10. Next up, the Nile Crocodile. And with this card, it recounts the Egyptian plover story. Yay! 9 out of 10. Next up, the Gariel, and I really want to deduct points just for the fact that it's portraying it as a scary animal, even though they're fish eaters. But, besides the drawing, this card is actually pretty friendly towards them, even pointing out that there hasn't really been any attacks on humans. So I can't really do anything here. 10 out of 10. Finally, we got the Black Cayman. And it kind of bothers me how far away it is from the rest of the Crocodilians. The others are only like a few cards apart, but this one is like 50 cards apart. That kind of bothers me for some reason. Now, besides that, this card doesn't have anything else, and I can't really deduct a point for that. So, 10 out of 10. Now, let's discuss Crocodilians' relationships with humans. Now, crocodiles are pretty famous for attacking people. Why is that? Well, certain species of crocodiles are actually considered some of the few animals that actively try to prey on people. Yes, really. They actively go out of their way to hunt humans if they have the chance. And that is terrifying. Okay, so yeah. Now, crocodilian attacks are pretty common, but they're not as fatal as you might think. Their fatality rates are bigger than shark attacks, but not by much. Now, the reason there's more attacks than shark attacks is because people spend more time around them than with sharks, so I don't really know how to compare the two danger-wise. Now, basically every crocodilian I've talked about today is pretty common, with one exception, the Gariel. The Gariel is not only endangered, it is considered critically endangered, which is the second lowest level, only behind extinct in the wild for how rare an animal can be. And the reason why it's so endangered is because of people killing them out of fear that they hunt people, or the fact that they eat fish, which could remove food for other people. And honestly, these kind of endangered animals, I really don't know how to feel. On the one hand, yeah, I guess it sucks that they're killing livestock and things like that, but on the other hand, is it really worth driving a species to extinction just to save a few farm animals? Or fish or whatever? I don't know. Oh, speaking of endangered crocodilians, the American alligator was actually once a very endangered species, but conservation efforts happened and now they are incredibly common all throughout the southern United States. So common that some people actually consider them pests. And ironically, they're eaten by another pest, the Burmese python, so yeah. Alligator is also a pretty popular food down south. I've had it before. It kind of tastes like a fish stick and a chicken nugget had a baby. I don't know if people eat crocodile or Gariel or Cayman, but I assume it would have a similar taste. Now in zoos, crocodilians are very common. In fact, they're basically a staple zoo animal. Most zoos either have Nile crocodiles or American alligators, but some zoos also have Cayman and a few have Gariels. Like, for example, I once went to this one zoo in Texas that had all 4 groups represented. They had alligators, crocodiles, Cayman, and Gariels. It was honestly kind of cool. Well, that's all for this episode of Nightmares in Nature. Next time, we're talking about snakes. Bye! Hey Eric, what's up? I found Mr. G's dad's laptop, but it's password protected and I'm gonna have to give it back. I just wish I could find the password before he gets home so I could see what's on this thing. Well, why don't you just use Mr. G's skeleton password that he keeps in the basement? His what? Oh yeah, Mr. G found out about this number combination that kind of causes an override in every single password screen, causing an instant login, and he keeps a thumb drive containing it in the basement. Thanks for the advice, Catherine.